Perfect. Hello, everybody. Just letting everybody get settled in for a minute here. We're starting at 1 p.m. ET. It is 1 p.m. ET right now. I know people are filtering in. So while we're doing that and people are getting settled, I'll just start with an intro. Hello and welcome to the Vertex Team Cymru webinar, Beyond IOCs, Enriching Threat Investigations with Global Network Telemetry. I'm Callie Fensel, Senior Marketing Manager at the Vertex Project. Our speakers today are Ryann Hallback, aka Ryann, Principal Intelligence Analyst from the Vertex Project, and Eli Woodward, Senior Cyber Threat Intelligence Advisor from Team Cymru. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go over. If you have a question, please feel free to ask in the Q&A section of Zoom, and we will do our best to address it at the end of the presentation. As the voice recording mentioned, this presentation is being recorded, and it will be provided in an email follow-up, and we will share it on YouTube later this week. And once the presentation has concluded, we do have a brief survey that we'd appreciate it if you filled out so we can provide the most relevant content for future presentations. So with that, I am going to hand the reins over to Ryann and Eli for the presentation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, good morning and hello, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Eli Woodward, and welcome. I'm with Team Cymru, and I'm joined today by Ryann Hallback from the Vertex Project. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll use a real DPRK IT worker investigation to demonstrate how we combined Synapse and the Team Cymru Power-Up to discover and investigate previously unknown infrastructure. We'll start with intelligence from public reporting, use that intelligence to identify network characteristics and communication patterns we could hunt for, and then show how we use Team Cymru Telemetry and Synapse to identify and analyze infrastructure matching those characteristics and patterns.
As CTA analysts, it's our job to figure out how threat actors operate, right? So we build detailed knowledge about everything that they do. We collect information about their IOCs, infrastructure tools, TTPs, and even their communication patterns to help us understand their activity. Curating all of that intelligence is good, but the real value for us comes when we're able to take that knowledge and use it to support CTI workflows like supporting an IR engagement or hunting for new threat activity.
This is where the combination of Synapse and Team Cymru becomes valuable. Synapse allows you to represent threat intelligence and your understanding of a set of activity in a way that it can be inspected and analyzed. It structures data and relationships so they can be queried, connected to related activity, and used to support other intelligence workflows like threat hunting. It also allows you to enrich and fuse intelligence from other data sources, i.e. MaxMind, Shodan, and internal telemetry, to build a more complete picture of a cluster of activity. Team Cymru gives you visibility into a global internet telemetry and allows you to search for network activity and enrich network indicators with additional context. Scout gives you access to network traffic summaries and IP enrichment data, and Recon provides access to enriched and raw data. In this investigation, you'll see how we use both to hunt for infrastructure and analyze its associated activity. First, we'll show you how we used a known communication pattern to identify and enrich previously unknown infrastructure using Team Cymru. Then we analyzed that data, and we got back in Synapse to determine if it matched the activity we were investigating.
All right. So for our use case, we decided to investigate DPRK IT worker activity. Let's see here. We focus our attention on this activity because the threat is something that's timely, it's active, and its network operations have really historically followed a distinct behavioral pattern. So our goal was to take the infrastructure characteristics and the communication patterns that we found in public reporting, like the one you see here from Mandiant on AMP 5267, and use that to try to discover new or previously unreported activity. The one thing that I want to point out is that for this investigation, what we were interested in was anything that would fall within that broader ecosystem of labor-related activities sponsored by the North Korean government. So we weren't specifically looking for a name cluster like AMP 5267. We just wanted to find anything that can match their patterns of activity. So in order for us to hunt for those behaviors, we needed access to internet telemetry, right? And that's where Team Cymru came into play. So the Team Cymru Power-Up is what allows us to take those characteristics, those patterns that we identified in reporting, and then search for those in their telemetry and ingest that data directly into Synapse. In addition to using it to hunt for specific activity, what you'll see is we also used it in this investigation to pull in things like raw net flow data and network context for IPs of interest. So that really gave us the visibility and the context that we needed to help us analyze the traffic and really understand how what we were seeing may fit into the broader IT worker ecosystem. So what I'll do now is start to talk a little bit about our investigation, since I've given you some information about the Power-Up. To track our investigation, we created a story and a top-level tag named Homebody. You'll see me use this tag or reference this tag throughout the webinar. And we use this tag to just help us cluster related nodes, things that we found interesting for our investigation. And then as we learned more, we added more specific tags underneath it to help us capture some additional context. To build a hunt, like we said, we wanted to leverage OSINT. So what we did, we started out by pulling in public reporting from any vendor that we felt like had some good reporting, and we modeled that directly in Synapse. So our goal was to look at these reports, try to find any characteristics, any pattern that we can use to try to fingerprint IT worker activity. So things like the infrastructure that they used, and also the services that they use for their operations. How could we hunt for this in Team Cymru's telemetry? If we look at all of the data that we were able to model, the reporting gave us quite a bit to work with. So within the report, looking at what we have here, we got a chance to see some of the threat clusters that were reported. So if it gave us a name threat cluster, we modeled that because we just wanted to know, hey, what name do they use to refer to this set of activity? It also gave us things like the platforms that they use as well to perform their operations. So we noticed that, hey, they're using ChatGPT, they're using Dropbox. We see them referencing Freelancer Map or GitHub. All of these things became important because we figured maybe we can use this to look in the telemetry. Other things that we got back, we also saw some of the tools that they used as well, whether it was malware families or just general software. So we noticed that they were constantly being associated with things like AnyDesk or AnyViewer for remote access. We also noticed that they were using things like Astral VPN to proxy their traffic. Another thing that the reports were really good at was identifying or calling out some of the TTPs that were commonly associated with their operations. So these are some of the TTPs that we modeled. And there was one in particular that stood out to us and caught our attention, and it was their use of multi-hop proxying to facilitate their operations. This was actually something that quite a few vendors called out, Microsoft being one of them. So in this Jasper Sleep report, they actually talked about this. Try to make this a little bigger, not that big. But they actually talked about this and explained what this looked like. It's covered a little bit here in this diagram. But what they explained was before the IT workers would access their victim organization, the first thing that they would do is maybe use something like a VPN. And then from there, they would VPN to a residential IP to make it look like they were coming from a legitimate employee address. We found this to be a pretty interesting technique and communication pattern to hunt for. So this was something that we decided to use and try to look for within Team Cymru telemetry. So now we just needed to know, how could we actually hunt for it, right? We needed to know what this looked like on the wire in the network. So to figure that out, what we did was we took a look at some of the infrastructure that we pulled in when we triaged the OSINT. And if we look at that infrastructure in StatsView, we're able to get a pretty good idea of what that infrastructure looked like. When we initially pulled the IOCs into Synapse, one of the first things we did was we took advantage of Team Cymru, where we automatically enriched it with its details command. When we enrich it with the Scout details, what this allows us to do is just pull in additional context to make our analysis easier. So some of the context that we're able to pull in may come in the form of tags, where we see here that Team Cymru has identified an IP address as an Astro VPN. We can also come over here to the tag breakdown and look at some of the tags that Team Cymru applied in general. So as a whole, what we noticed was a huge percentage of their infrastructure, their IP infrastructure, was identified as VPN, so about 35%. And then if you look from there, about 27% of those were Astro VPN nodes. So what was interesting was the fact that there was such a high usage of Astro VPNs. This was now a characteristic that we can then take and try to add to the communication pattern that we wanted to search for. So what we had now in our minds was everything we kind of needed to build our hut. We had a TTP that we wanted to look for, and we had some characteristics that we could throw on top of that as well. So what we were going to look for, what we decided to look for in this investigation is the pattern that you see on the screen. We wanted to hunt for multi-hop proxy activity where a North Korean IP initiated a connection to an Astro VPN. And then from there, that Astro VPN then communicated with US residential infrastructure. So this is what you're going to see us walk through and try to prove and find as we go through this investigation. So to start the investigation and to look for the behavior, we needed to be able to find both sides of that communication. So we're looking for multi-hop traffic. So we're going to have one half that we need to look for first, and then we need to find the other half as well and see if we can have them merge at some point. So we ran 2 sets of Scout searches to look for this activity. We ran one looking for Astro VPNs communicating with North Korean IPs. And then we ran another to look for residential IPs communicating with Astro VPNs. So the query that you see here, this is the first query that we ran to try to detect the first hop in that communication chain. This query that you see, these 3 queries, these actually get saved by the Team Cymru Power-Up. So any query that I run, I have this historical information that I can always come back to. So here specifically, what I'm using is their native query syntax to say, hey, I want to see all of the Astro VPNs that you have in your telemetry, but specifically those that have communicated with North Korean IPs. So we ran that to search over about 90 days. And then when we ran that, we got some data back. Specifically, what was found by Team Cymru was that there were 63 Astro VPNs that communicated with North Korean IPs in the past 90 days. So we had our initial set of VPNs that we wanted to look at. We added them to our homebody research by tagging them specifically with a KP tag to indicate that these IPs had communicated with North Korean infrastructure. And then also just to say that, hey, this is confirmed Astro VPN infrastructure as well. So that's the first side of that communication. Next, we wanted to try to get the other side of that communication. So what we did there is we started to look for activity between a residential IP located in the US communicating with an Astro VPN. So this is what this search is doing here. We're searching Team Cymru's assets for any US IP that communicated with an Astro VPN. So we got some data back with that one as well. When we look at those results, we got a lot more US IPs than we did VPNs. Specifically, we got back 1,000 US IPs that had been observed communicating with Astro VPNs. We can tell from the location props that these IPs were in fact located in the United States. And then using Team Cymru's context, we can see that they confirm that this is a residential IP as well. And we can kind of see some of that with the ASN names that we pulled back from the providers. So we then tag these with an Astro VPN tag, a comms tag specifically, just to track the fact that these residential IPs were observed at some point communicating with an Astro VPN. So after running those two scout searches, we kind of had every part, if you will, of a potential IT worker chain. We had the North Korean IPs at the beginning that were seen communicating with the Astro VPN. We had the Astro VPNs in the middle, and then we had the residential IPs at the end. So that gave us over 1,000 IPs that we needed to sift through, right, and try to fit into this communication chain. That's a lot. So what we needed to do from here was try to narrow down these results to find a potential single chain that we can investigate. So to do that, we decided to start with the Astro VPN, right, because that is what has to be in the middle to connect the two ends of the communication chain. So to do that, what we started to look for was anywhere that an Astro VPN had a communication with both a US residential IP and a North Korean IP. So that is the query that you see me running here. I looked at all of the Astro VPNs that we have, and then I looked for communications to either a US residential IP or a North Korean IP. That gave us back 3 IPs, which is very good because we started out with 63. So from here, what we wanted to do was decide, okay, which one of these IPs do we want to focus on, right? What looks like a good candidate to potentially investigate as that relay node in between North Korea and this US IP? This 174 IP immediately caught our attention. And the reason that it did, looking at its tags, this IP was previously reported by Mandiant and linked to UNC 5267. It was reported, back in their original report back in September 2024. So that made it very interesting, right? We have an Astro VPN, right, in our results with historical ties to UNC 5267 that was observed talking to a North Korean IP and a US IP within the past 60 days. We felt like that was a strong lead, so we decided to go with that IP. From there, the next thing we needed to do was find a US IP that we wanted to try to fit into that chain as well. So where would we start? What we decided to do was look at all of the US IPs that had observed communications to this 174 Astro VPN address. So that was a good filter query to run because that took us down from 1,000 residential IPs, that were originally returned from Team Cymru down to just around 20. So from there, we need to figure out, all right, which one of these residential IPs do we want to try to fit into this chain? There were immediately about 3 nodes that caught our attention here. The first 2, they caught our attention because they were tagged with Pi KVM. This is, software that vendors like Microsoft have listed as one of the services that IT workers commonly use to remote into company-issued laptops. So the fact that, we saw this tag on 2 of these IPs made these interesting. But there was another IP that was even more interesting than that. And that was this 172 IP address. And that's because this IP, out of all of these IPs that were returned, was the only one that was actually a proxy server. And it was more than just, a single proxy server. It actually had 2 proxy tags on it. It had a proxy line tag, also another service that's recently been kind of linked to IT worker activity. And then it's also listed as a SOX proxy as well. So given that, we decided to focus on this IP address. Now, before we decided to investigate, and before we really could investigate this IP address, we needed to do a little bit more enriching and pulling some more data from Team Cymru. So when we initially enriched all of our IPs, the one thing that we pulled in was just like net flow summary data, but Team Cymru has the ability to give us raw net flows as well. So we wanted to pull in those raw net flows because we wanted to know who this IP had been talking to, right? We're trying to profile this box to see if this looks like a residential IP that DPRK might actually be using. So we pulled in some net flows for that IP. And then something else that we wanted to do, once we pulled in those net flows, we got all of the communication peers that I had been observed with. So we got, let's say, data back like this. This kind of shows you the difference between just a network summary that you get back from Scout versus actual raw net flows that you'll get back from Recon. Where here we just have like a generic timestamp. It's not an actual time that the flow occurred. We don't have the source port. This was pulled in from Scout. But when we pull in the raw net flow records, what you actually get is the detailed information that we needed to do our investigation, because we wanted to know what times, did we see this IP communicating with the peer? What ports were they using? It was also helpful to have things like the number of the number of transferred bytes, the number of packets seen, even the TCP flags, because this allowed us to understand the direction of the communication. So once we got back those raw net flows, the other thing that we needed to do was enrich the peers that it was communicating with. And the reason that we wanted to do that is because it's helpful to see that it's communicating with this 34 IP address, but it's more helpful to understand, what they're doing. So if I can actually see, that this communication is not between a server that's doing port scanning, but it's more, like this is a LinkedIn IP address, that's helpful, right? That gives me some context. So what we did, we pulled in the DNS information for these communication peers. And so that allowed us to do things like pivot over and see what FQDNs they resolved to. So in this case, that IP reserved to Workana, right, which is an employee-related platform that's previously been linked to IT worker activity. So for this residential IP, we now had its communication peers. We now pulled in some, additional passive DNS data from Team Cymru. So now we were ready to go and try to profile this IP and try to get a feel for what it was actually doing. To start out profiling the IP, we went back to stats mode, and we wanted to just take a look at all of the flows that we pulled in for this IP. I think in total, we pulled in just a little over 7,000 flows. So we wanted to try to take a look at these to see if we can figure out just how this box was operating. One of the first things we noticed was the days that this box was active. So by and large, this box was active every single day of the week, right? This doesn't look like any particular work pattern. I'm also not even sure if this looks like your typical residential home IP, maybe unless you work from home like me. But we didn't see that much of a lull in activity over the days. Then we went to the hours of the day, right? So when does this box seem to be active? All of the times that you see here are in UTC. So when we get to, this period here, 12 o'clock, this is actually 8 a.m. So what we noticed was that the highest concentration of activity on this system was taking place between 8 a.m. and 11 p.m., with, for some reason, 8 p.m. being the peak hour. So that's kind of the initial pattern of life that we were able to see for this box. The next thing we wanted to look for were the top talkers. Specifically, we're just trying to figure out who was communicating the most with this box. So what we did was we just tried to look at the flows that actually had that data in it, not just those summaries. So looking at the IPs, right, we pivoted over to the flows and then to the IPs on the other end. This gave us an idea of who this box was talking to the most. And what was interesting, if you take a look at it, I know it's probably hard to see, but the top 4 peers that you see here, they're all Astro VPNs, right? I'm not sure how common it is for residential IP to be communicating with Astro VPNs, but this box was. So we have a residential IP here. As you click through, Astro VPN here as well. And then we also noticed that half of the top 10 were Astro VPNs as well. So that was an interesting pattern that we noticed, about this box. Something else that was interesting was that a third of the top 10 were linked to Mandiant's AMP 5267. So once again, this is a cluster that we're continuously seeing crop up in our data, right? So once again, infrastructure that was previously linked to them, we're now seeing our box talk to not one, but 3 of their previously reported indicators. So the next thing we wanted to do was take a look at the destination ports, because we wanted to see what some of the inbound traffic might look like. So we wanted to see specifically which ports were seeing the most activity. So if we go down here and take a look at some of the port stats, what was interesting was this port was an obvious winner, this 62378 port. This port saw more than 1,000 inbound connections to it. This is a non-standard high port. And for a residential IP, the question is why, right? What are you doing on this port? Other ports that ended up being interesting, we had this 6457 port, and then we also had this 2442 port as well. So what we immediately noticed was that it had a lot of traffic destined for non-standard high ports. Once again, not something that you would typically expect to see for a residential IP. So having this original set of information, what we wanted to do now was go back and see what was listening on those ports. And what was interesting was that we actually found proxy activity, right? We confirmed that this box is serving as a proxy, and it also has SSH running as well. So all of this is good because it's consistent with what we typically would expect to see with IT worker activity. We have proxy servers and we have remote access servers as well. So the next thing we wanted to know was who was communicating to this box on those ports. So we ran a query to search for all of the inbound traffic that was destined for those ports. And what we got back were 26 IPs. So looking at those 26 IPs, 9 of those, once again, looking at the tags, were Astro VPNs. And that's a lot. You have 9 Astro VPNs connecting in on SSH and proxy ports. And no surprise, as I mentioned before, once again, AMP 5267 was coming up, right, as an IP address. So what it looked like that gave us, based on everything we were able to confirm, was the second hop of that multi-hop chain. We had evidence of activity that's happening between an Astro VPN and a residential IP. So the next thing we needed to do was find that first hop, right? Could we confirm that there was a connection or a hop between a North Korean IP address and also that same Astro VPN? So to find that first hop, what we needed to do, right, because we already knew and confirmed that the Astro VPN had connections to both to IPs in both countries, what we needed to find was a temporal overlap. So we needed to prove that these 2 sets of activities, these 2 sets of traffic were happening around the same time. Because if the VPN was acting as a relay, we would expect to see both sides of the traffic occurring around the same time. So what we did was we juxtaposed the North Korean and Astro VPN flows with the flows coming from the Astro VPN to the North Korean, to the residential IP. We were trying to find anything that looked like a good temporal overlap, and we actually did find them. So if we took a look at May 8th alone, we found multiple instances of the North Korean IP, which is the IP that you see here, communicating with the Astro VPN. I'll use this one as an example, communicating with the Astro VPN, the 174. And then immediately after that, we have the Astro VPN communicating with our residential IP address. So we don't expect the times to line up perfectly, right? We're dealing with some sampling here, but this was pretty convincing, right? To have activity happening this close together where we're able to show, that in one flow, we have a North Korean IP send data to the VPN, right? This is a push and an act. We can actually see that this was a data packet. It's not just, an empty packet. It sent a small amount of bytes, but every byte counts here. So it sent some traffic, and then that VPN sent some traffic to the residential IP as well. We have the same TCP flag, so we have yet, a push and an act, and then we see the number of bytes that were sent. What we noticed was that this DPRK, it's a VPN to residential communication pattern, and that timing really did repeat, throughout the data. So we kind of went through and tagged what we felt like were interesting or valid overlaps. So anytime we saw the North Korean IP talk to that Astro VPN, and then the Astro VPN turn around and talk to that North Korean IP, we felt like that was pretty solid evidence. And the fact that we were able to see that pattern repeat, what this told us is that this wasn't a fluke or an isolated incident, but more than likely a part of a larger or more consistent pattern of activity. So that really gave us what we needed to connect the two hops, right? And establish that multi-hop communication pattern that we were looking for. We found a North Korean IP address talking to an Astro VPN that then in turn talked to a residential proxy. The last thing we wanted to do, right, before we, say, hey, we're done, is we wanted to profile the residential IP just to make sure that its overall activity aligned with the broader IT worker activity and behaviors that we had seen in public reporting. So what we decided to do was kind of take all of the net flows and then pivot to its communication peers. And then from their communication peers, we married up the time that the flows took place, and we looked for the DNS resolution overlaps just to see, hey, what FQDNs, right, resolved to those IPs at that time. So doing that allowed us to see exactly who was on the other side of the communication, not just the IP, but really just to get an idea of what platforms they're using or what services they're accessing. So looking at the zones for all of those domains that we got back, right, we saw things that were pretty interesting. We saw references to crypto systems like Atomic Wallet. We know that they use that as a part of their operations. We saw employment platforms pop up. So First Job Me, Freelancer Map, those are things that have been previously associated with the IT workers as well as InfoJobs and LinkedIn. We also saw evidence of GitHub, right? And once again, proxying kept coming up as well. Workana came up, once again, another job site. And then we had things like Quick Connect, which is used to remote into these boxes. So a lot of things that were previously reported about IT workers, we're actually seeing directly on this host, even messaging platforms like WhatsApp. The really interesting thing that stuck out was us seeing this Lucky Guys site pop up in the data as well. This Lucky Guys site was publicly reported by a security researcher. And he just mentioned that, hey, this is something that they were using internally as their payment system. So we're able to find and see, and take note of the fact that, hey, this was a website that was recorded. He linked that to DPRK. And lo and behold, we see this residential IP address accessing this site. And they accessed this site before April 8th. It was around April 3rd, right before this was outed. They had traffic to that site. So this was all pretty cool because, if we compare the domains and the platforms that we see here happening on this host to going back to our public reporting to all of the platforms that we extracted from those reports, you start to see a significant overlap, right? You're seeing your AI, you're seeing all of your job sites, your GitHub, LinkedIn, you see Netlify, everything that we identify on that host, we're seeing here in public reporting. So after comparing that activity, what we realized that we had was a residential host running proxy and SSH servers, receiving inbound connections from astral VPNs, participating in a multi-hop communication, and interacting with the same employment, development, proxy, and crypto services that were associated with the IT work ecosystem. Taking all of those things into consideration, that gave us the high confidence to say, hey, that this is, likely previously unreported residential infrastructure that's being used to support the broader DPRK IT worker ecosystem. So that was our research. And that was just, how we took and, started with intel that was in prose. We looked for key characteristics. We then turned those characteristics into a hunt that we can use to search across Team Cymru's telemetry. And then using Synapse, we were able to inspect the data and really ask some hard questions and get answers pretty quickly. So today, what we showed you was we think the power of combining Team Cymru's unique global internet visibility with the Synapse analysis platform. The DPRK investigation that you just saw me walk through was just one example of how you can use our tools to support infrastructure and network intelligence analysis. Team Cymru gives you the telemetry and the context that you need, and then Synapse gives you the analytical environment that you need. It allows you to fuse and represent and interact with the data in a way so that you can take these complex relationships, like that pattern that we just showed, and easily identify and uncover patterns, right, to help you answer certain questions. So whether you're interested in hunting for covert C2 beacon activity, identifying a subdomain takeover from a deprovisioned cloud resource, or even assessing the impact of a supply chain compromise, these two platforms can be used to give you the visibility, the context, and the capabilities that you need to tackle those problems. And that's it. That's all I got.
I like how you ended that, Ryann.
If you're not trying.
Is that all? Nothing more? I mean, I feel like
Very
I'm done. I'm through. I'm finished.
That's all there is.
That's all there is.
A couple questions. Well, I guess first, before we get into the questions, so Ryann is showing further resources. I know they're not clickable right now as we're in Zoom, but I will be sharing the recording of this and the slides, like I mentioned, in a follow-up email. So you will be able to click on these things. But obviously, if you want to get into our Vertex's Intel Sharing Synapse instance, that's available to you. You can request a demo. Team Cymru has also redesigned their website recently, so please check that out as well. We do have a couple questions. Well, I have one comment, Ryann. First of all, I love how you color-coded your flows or rows. I feel that allows you to step slightly out of the matrix. And then if you would like to comment on that comment, you absolutely can. And then another question, how do Ryann and Eli not do more of these amazing sessions?
No, I got to say, it was fun putting this together with Ryann, but Ryan's capability with this tool is absolutely mind-blowing to see the stuff that she was able to tease apart and do with this. I've heard a lot about Vertex and Synapse and just how powerful it is, but seeing what Ryann could do, it blew me away too. It was pretty impressive. So kudos to you, Ryann. Well done.
No, and I'm going to give you some kudos too. It was absolutely fun working with you on this as well, and getting to play in Team Cymru's data for free. It was great. Like the visibility, the context, just what you all are able to see and what you can inform. It's awesome. So thank you so much.
Maybe just one final question before we adjourn today, unless other folks want to type in any questions in the question and answer box, that's completely fine too. But Ryann and Eli, if somebody has access to Vertex but not access to Team Cymru and vice versa, what are the best steps to ensure that you can have access to the one that you don't have?
That's a good question. I know for Synapse, you can always have access to Synapse, right? Because you can request a Synapse demo instance.
Mhm.
As far as Team Cymru, Eli, I'll let you speak to that one.
Yeah, so there is some sensitivities around the data. So we do have a vetting process just to meet with anybody who's interested and whatnot, understand what are the use cases, what are the desired outcomes, impacts, and is it a good fit for what you're trying to do? Because there's definitely a lot you can do with it, as you can see. So, and also just figure out what are the questions you're trying to answer. I joke that the beauty and the horror of Team Cymru is we have a lot of data. So that means you can really go anywhere and get answers, but is it answers that are relevant to you? So figuring out what the question is that you're trying to get to, understanding and have a good, clear question equals a good, clear answer. Bad questions equals bad answers, right? It's kind of like Googling in some ways like that. So that's why we really like to work with people to understand what is it you're trying to do and make sure we get them there the best, most effective way possible. So that being said, yeah, if they were interested, yeah, please feel free to reach out, LinkedIn or on through our website there or through here. Happy to get in touch and figure out how to figure out a partnership and go forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Another question, is this the newest version of Vertex showing? I'm assuming that's relating to the beta Syn 3 that's been coming around, and then we're trying to GA the next or Syn 3 hopefully tomorrow. So Rayn, do you want to handle that question?
Sure. No, this isn't. This is our V2 that I'm working in. So that's what you see here. So yeah, this would probably look totally different in V3, the nodes that were used and all that stuff. So
We will have a walkthrough of Syn V3 soon. We did post on our website. We were supposed to have that in July. I overpromised that one. I'm going to take that one. So that is coming. Another question. I love this question. It's super easy. Will the recording be available? Absolutely. We have been recording this, and the purpose is to share an email. So if you the folks that have been viewing this signed up with their email address, I'll be sharing up a follow-up email after this with the recording. And then you'll also see splices of this over the next few weeks on social media, just to reinforce that it's available if you'd like to share with your colleagues. All right, and then one more, it's more of a comment. Thanks for all the great walkthroughs at this use case. I'd love to recreate this for my Intel classes. And yes, TC is one of the greatest data sources in the world, but also one of the most difficult to use. Ooh, interesting.
I'm curious what makes it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think, yeah, I can talk to that. So I think for me, one of the interesting things is, like I said, there's a lot there. So figuring out what it is you're trying to do and making sure that you stay on topic and stay relevant to your end goals. That's been the hardest thing for me because there's just so many different little data points and things you can look at and ways you can go, and understanding is that necessarily relevant to my particular thing I'm looking at right now. X509 certs, JAW4 hashes, TLS certs. Those are all potentially components that you could be looking at, NetFlow data, et cetera. But, passive DNS obviously was a big one as Ryann was demonstrating there, and then understanding which of these is relevant or not is seeing that this suspected remote IT worker is hitting Workana super relevant. Well, yeah, a vendor actually just put out a report recently that they saw traffic. They saw that was one of the TTPs they're using. Workana is like a Fiverr, but specifically for South American IT companies. So, it's little things like that you, like I said, you need to have a good, clear understanding of what it is you're trying to do up front. And then the other side of that too is just, being around it enough to figure out what it is you can even do. There's a lot of questions you didn't even know you could ask. I've been here for over a year now, and I've been saying that my understanding of our data and our tools changes every 3 months. Just because, the more time I spend in it, the more things I do, and the more investigations I do, the more I see the potential capabilities. And so, a year ago, and I feel like the average beginner user just says, cool, I can use this to enrich IPs. And now today, it's so much more than that. Do you understand your vendor ecosystem? Do you want to understand your third-party risk? Do you understand your risk? Do you want to understand the M&A environment for what you might be looking at? There's a ton of different things. And so that's why I say, like, knowing the questions you can even ask is kind of profound as well. Sorry, there's a number. Yeah, it's a comment here, just that there's been a number of reports written with our data, because it's hard to validate sometimes some of the data and how that matches up with your hypothesis. So yeah, also like figuring out, where you can pressure check things and how. That's another question that can be. It's more art than science at times, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty cool stuff you can do. And Ryan jumped right into it here and obviously ran with it pretty well. Sorry, that was Professor Eli ranting for a minute. I'll stop there.
What a webinar's all about. I do see a hand up. If you'd like to type your question into the Q&A bar, that would be great. We're just trying to preserve anonymity for all of our guests, unless maybe that hand up is just an accident, which could also be the case. I will read this comment while we're waiting. Ryan did great. Excellent analysis. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Analysis is a hard word for me to say.
Mark Eli in there too.
Eli and Ryan, you did a good job. I'm going to assume that hand raise right now is maybe accidental, just because I don't see that in the Q&A box. But of course, if you want to reach out to us afterwards with a question, please feel free to do so. Again, Ryan and Eli, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to all of our attendees for really sticking it through the whole presentation. You guys have been fantastic. These are great questions and comments. And please, once we adjourn, there will be that survey that we're sharing afterwards. I really would love it if people filled it out. It just helps us to create the best content moving forward that you all want to see. So I want to make sure everything that we're showing is pertinent and relevant to you. So if you could do that, that would be great. But again, thank you so much for your time today, and we will catch everybody at the next webinar. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.